Welcome to another edition of Who's Better Baseball, the podcast where we answer a simple question on each show. Who's better at baseball? I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein, managing editor at justbaseball.com. I have Elijah Evans, one of our writers, with us today. And when the question comes of who's better at baseball with the Angels, it's how can they continue to get better and what can they do to make this all-out push to make the playoffs? And essentially, we've been discussing this before record today. It's clear that the Angels have no plans on trading Shohei Ohtani. We've seen it from the offseason spending to aggressive promotions of Zach Neto and Ben Joyce to now making trades for Eduardo Escobar and Mike Moustakas to try to help with Gio Urshela and Anthony Rendon going down. From your perspective, those little trades, just a Band-Aid? Is it nice moves? It seems like from Mike Trout's comments, the team's pretty fired up about it. But then again, it's not like you're bringing in, these guys at the prime of their careers.
Right. I think right now with this team, you're trying to fill every hole you can, and you're trying to create a roster that can legitimately make a playoff run. And I think right now it's hard to look at the scope of the league in late June and say you're going to make an impact trade. I think these trades that they've made with Escobar and Moustakas, I think they can help. I don't think they're bad moves, but I also don't think they're changing the future of this team. And I think that they're going to have to get a little bit more aggressive come July when things really start to ramp up if they want to make this a serious contender in order to keep Shohei Ohtani around. I mean, we look at this team and you say, there's not many players on this roster where you look at them and you're like, that is a future cornerstone player. Zach Neto came up. That was a really aggressive promotion. He looks talented. He's hurt right now, but he looks good. He's got issues. He's growing pains, but that's, again, he was drafted last year. It's going to take some time, but he's been a positive player. I mean, he's got one WAR on the season. He's been a solid defender at shortstop. That's a future piece, right? And you've got Mike Trout, of course. He's going to be there forever. Rendon's going to be there for a while, whether you like it or not. His contract's huge. He's going to be hurt a lot, but when he's healthy, he was pretty good this year. But then beyond that, it's hard to look around the roster. Taylor Ward's been solid. There's a few other pieces here and there, but it's hard to look around the roster and find cornerstones. So for the time being, they just have to fill the hole in every way they can with the best possible options.
To me, it screams of a team that's not willing to waste any time. And I think when you have these contenders, a lot of times it's all right. We have some holes. Let's buy time. Let's do what we can to make it to the trade deadline. Where the Angels are saying, look, we can't be losing games at the end of June and early July. We got to do everything we can to make sure we don't fall out of this race because we don't want to have those tough conversations at the deadline. And right now, they're sitting, 5 games back in the division, and they're half a game out of the wild card. It's a crazy race ahead of them. I mean, you look at the 4 teams, technically, or 3 teams ahead of them and one they're tied with. It's the Orioles, Yankees, and Blue Jays that are holding on to wild card spots, and the Astros are, right there with them. They're one less win and one less loss, but an identical place in the standings there. It's a tough race to just make the playoffs. That's the crazy thing to me. I look at those 5 teams. Are you picking the Angels out of those 5 teams to make the playoffs? Like of those 5, who are the 3 you're taking?
Not the Angels. I mean, I don't believe the Astros are done. I know they've been injured. They've looked like they just haven't looked good, but I'm taking the Astros. I just am. They're the defending champs. They're an incredibly good team when they're healthy, and they're going to get some guys back soon. So I'm taking the Astros. I'm definitely taking Baltimore. I don't care how young they are. Baltimore has looked unbelievable this season. And then it comes down to the Yankees and Blue Jays, who both are underperforming, and they're still ahead of the Angels right now, who are overperforming based on where they were last year and the years before. So I'm probably still taking Toronto there, I think, maybe. I mean, if depending on when Aaron Judge comes back, maybe I'm taking the Yankees. But the Angels, in my mind, right now are 5th out of those 5 teams that are competing for 3 wildcard spots. So you look at the scope of the AL East and West. We're not talking Central. Central sucks. But when you look at the scope of the East and the West, there's 4 teams in both those divisions. We didn't even mention the Mariners. There's 4 teams in both those divisions that are legitimate playoff caliber teams. While only 4 of those 8 are going to make the playoffs, or 5 of those 8 most likely are going to make the playoffs. I don't know if the Angels are in that upper echelon of, Rays, Orioles, Astros, Rangers, that whole category of teams that are better than the Angels right now. Can they get better? Maybe. Is Mike Moustakas and Eduardo Escobar making them better? Probably not.
And that's the thing for me. It's you know, I feel like where this could head is the Angels exhaust all possibilities, still miss the playoffs again, and lose Ohtani, and then where is your franchise? And that's the scary, scary thing. And it's tough because what do you tell your fans? Do you tell your fans, or what do your fans want? Do you want to really think future and do the best thing for your franchise, which honestly would be to trade Ohtani in some respects, to get some prospects back and hope that at some point in 3 years you can be good, or do you do everything you can to keep Ohtani? And I guess ultimately where you end up with is if you go on a run and you find a way to make the playoffs and you bring him back, everything is worth it. Shohei Ohtani is worth
Yeah,
5 years of developing prospects, if not 10. It doesn't matter if you get
100%.
Ohtani back. That's all that matters. And clearly, that's the mode of operation right now. I just don't see that vision yet. And I guess the question now we have to look at is going over this roster. What can they do? What are the moves they can make? And then that's not even getting to the prospect side of it of what do they have to get these players. I mean,
Right.
they're able to swing deals for Escobar and Moustakas. Are they swinging a deal for Shane Bieber? I just don't know what they have in the tank
Yeah.
to make these moves. But let's first start with what do they need to add to
Right.
actually be in this race?
It's hard to look at this roster because you don't have a spot in the lineup where like that lineup spot is a clear number one hole. It's kind of a few different places throughout their lineup and throughout the pitching staff where like that could be upgraded, but it's just a matter of figuring out which spots you can plug and then where you can move some of these, average decent players and have them into more of a utility role, have them more into bench role, whatever it might be. So it's going to be a lot of shifting and shuffling no matter what you do. But I think when you look at the Angels lineup, I don't think you're really messing with the outfield. I mean, you've got Trout, Mickey Moniak's been weirdly good. Taylor Ward has still been solid. He's having not as good of a year as last year, but he's still OPSing just under 800 right now. You've got Hunter Renfroe who's been playing some first base, but he's still Hunter Renfroe. I think you're still running him out there when everybody's healthy in the outfield. Joe Adell's been amazing in the minors. He just came up. There's a variety of options. Maybe you add a corner outfield piece. You add the right fielder potentially, but I still don't know if that's necessarily a clear spot. I mean, now that they've added Moustakas and Escobar, it's just a matter of whether you are expecting those guys to be everyday starters or they're more platoon bats. If you're committing to those guys being more platoon bats, which is probably what they should be at this point in their career, I think you could look at adding in the infield. Drury's been solid. Rengifo's been all right. It hasn't been bad production all around. I think you're expecting when Neto comes back, he's going to get back into a starting role. Rendon, you just can't rely on for health. So I don't mind the idea of adding, it wouldn't be a bad idea to add a first base bat. I think it's pretty easy to get a first baseman in the market oftentimes. And, Jared Walsh got optioned recently. So I think even though you do have, Moustakas and Drury both play a good amount of first, I think you could add a first baseman and then have those guys be more of the, rotating second, third baseman type role. I think you could add a third baseman just because Rendon is not reliable, and just have another guy that can play there. But again, you're looking at a roster with a lot of guys that move all over the place. So like you do have four different guys that can play third base right now, but are any of them somebody you want as your everyday third baseman at one of the most premium offensive positions in the league? And then you go to the pitching side. Ohtani is amazing, yes, of course, and I think you look at like Patrick Sandoval's been good. You're not really adjusting that. Reed Detmers has been up and down, but he's still a good young pitcher that they trust and they like. That's a top three you like. Tyler Anderson's not going anywhere. He hasn't been that great. Griffin Canning's been decent. I mean, both those guys have been okay, right? You look at there's not a clear this pitching area. This guy in the rotation is terrible, but I think an upgrade would help. I think if you have a Tyler Anderson and Griffin Canning being more of a switching off, maybe piggybacking each other type of five role, or you even expand it to a six and you add somebody into that 3-4 role, I think that could be good for the Angels. I think you're willing to add a rental if you're the Angels. Like we said, I mean, it's all about keeping Ohtani. You got to keep Ohtani. That's what it comes down to. You either got to reset and blow things up, which it doesn't seem like they're going to do, or you got to keep Ohtani. So you add another pitcher, you bump Canning maybe to the sixth starter role, long relief role, maybe a bullpen arm. I mean, Estevez has been really good in the closer role. They've got some other guys that have been all right, but they don't have many guys that have been great in the bullpen. I think you got to add a reliever. So I think it's just kind of filling things all over the roster. But I think it comes down to like, can they swing a big trade? And I don't, like you said, I don't know if they can, but I think they need to try. I mean, they're one of the few teams based on the roster situation that need to try for a big target. And I don't know what that target's going to be for them, but they need to swing for the fences right now.
I look at everything you kind of lay out there. I'm trying to figure out what makes sense. And ultimately, when it comes to the offense, I think it's just grab the best bat you can and
Yes.
figure it out later.
Yes.
So because you have too many of these guys that are caught in the middle. And the funny thing is, I can see a very real possibility where Eduardo Escobar and Mike Moustakas don't even finish the season on the roster. Where
Right.
depending on what they do at the deadline, these are guys that could be DFA'd at some point, which is crazy to
Yep.
say. But they were traded for. I really believe they acquired those two guys for June 25th through the deadline. It's like we
Yeah.
got Rendon out, we got Urshela out for the season. Just get us back. So grab the best bat you can. The problem is there's not a lot of good bats available.
No.
We'll see how the race shakes out. I don't know where that bat is. I mean, is it is it the Mets are a dumpster fire and you try to grab something from them? A lot of these guys are underperforming. Are you just excited to say, hey, Starling Marte in a new situation? Does that get you excited? I don't know, but I think the trade target that makes a lot of sense to me, and then I want to get into the bullpen because I think that's also the big area that they should add. Just try to
Yeah.
build as good of a bullpen as you can, so anytime you have a lead, you win that game. To me, though, I think the trade target that makes a lot of sense is Lucas Giolito, which I know you can speak
Yeah.
to. You get a rental come in, you probably don't have to
Yep.
give it that much. A guy that can dominate in the right
Yeah.
circumstances. I think Giolito is the guy for them.
Yeah, I think Giolito. There's a few teams that Giolito fits on, and it's definitely one is the Angels, and I think that's probably the best one. Maybe they don't need long term. If they love what they see from him in a few months, they could extend him. His price is not going to be crazy high. He's a California guy. He's familiar with the area. I think you're looking at a guy who he slots in very comfortably behind Ohtani and Sandoval. He's right there with Detmers. Him and Detmers are if that's your 3 or 4 punch with Giolito and Detmers, you're in a good spot. He's not a star. He's not. I mean, we've seen with the White Sox, I've seen over the years, you're not getting a guy who's going to consistently go out there every start and mow guys down, but you're going to get a pitcher who is solid every time for the most part. He'll have some bad days, but he just is a solid overall pitcher. He's meant to be. I mean, right now with the scope of the White Sox, he's been either a 1 or a 2 in the last 4 seasons. With Cease has been more of the 1 last year, but then this year Gio has really been the best pitcher on the White Sox so far. So you're looking at a guy who's been a 1 or 2, but really is perfect in that 3-4 role, which is where the Angels would have him. It's a rental. It wouldn't be expensive. The White Sox would be. I mean, it's 3 months of a solid pitcher. Yes, the White Sox want to get some value and capitalize on a thin pitching market, but you're looking at one top 20 prospect and one filler young, low A development, a rookie ball type prospect. So it's not a crazy package. It seems like a no-brainer type of deal for me. There's a few other guys that fit in that category. I think they could look at like an Erod. There's a few other types of pitchers that would fit there. But I think in terms of rotation, you just add, maybe you try for, the Shane Bieber or the Marcus Stroman, where you reach a little bit and you send a little bit more capital. But I don't mind for the rotation's sake, just adding, one of those middle level rental guys like a Geo, like an Erod, something along those lines.
And then if you can pull that off, to me, it's just build out that bullpen. I
Yeah.
think that's the area where you can improve without having to give too much, and it could really make the difference. If you could get that point where you have 4 guys in your bullpen that you really trust, and anytime you get a lead, especially if you aren't, let's just say you have a Tyler Anderson make a start, and he only gets you through 5. You want
Right.
to be able to go to the bullpen and lock those games down. If they could do that, as much as I think a big bat would help, I just don't see that bat in this market. And I think that's where I think they should probably lean pitching
Yeah. And
and
I
just
think
hope that they get through it.
there's a good amount of options there too. I mean, I think talk to the White Sox, right? You got Giolito say, hey, can we get Kendall Graveman also? Can we get Joe Kelly also with Giolito? Something like that. I mean, the Sox are willing to eat some of that salary. Probably the Angels, I don't think are worried about the salary factor with some of those contracts. But you add a bullpen piece to that deal. You look at the Royals. You talk on a Roldis Chapman deal. He looks better than he has in a few years. That should be a cheap ad. The Royals don't need a Roldis Chapman. What are they competing for, right? So it's you add a Roldis Chapman quickly. No big deal. You plug it and play. There's a few other guys like that where you look at it and you make ads. Think about Again, I mean, maybe adding a catcher, right? Like we were talking about. There's, Salvi Perez. You want to make a big deal? I don't think the Royals are going to trade him. I know he's their franchise guy, but you got to explore every option right now. That's what we were just saying. I mean, you fill out this bullpen, you call the Reds, you say, Reds, we know you're amazing. Any chance you want to capitalize on Alexis Diaz and get three more great young players to add to your core? I don't think the Reds are going to do that right now, but you got to just expand all options. And the bullpen is definitely an area where it's easy to add relievers at the deadline, and it shouldn't be a problem. I think this team, Estevez has been a good anchor for them, but beyond that, you don't have those lockdown guys. Add two-star relievers, and you're in a totally different position when you get to the back half of the game. So it's just they just got to keep finding talent where they can, and I think it's going to be interesting to see what their trade capital looks like we were talking about earlier. Logan O'Hoppe is their young catcher. He's hurt this year, but I think they expect O'Hoppe to return next year, be their guy long term, hands down. Their number 2 overall prospect is Edgar Caro, who's also a catcher. They don't need, I mean, it's yes, Caro's only 20, so it's hard to, you're not planning like, oh, these are our 2 catchers. But if you have a catcher who you trust, Hoppy, your next best prospect is also a catcher. Edgar Caro can get you some serious stuff right now. Edgar Caro, along with some of their arms in their system, I think there's a lot of teams who would trade a high level impact pitcher and or hitter for an Edgar Caro and more type of package. So that's something to consider. I know it's like you don't want to give up the farm system, and he's probably their only, aside from Mohapi, who's already played, he's probably their only top prospect. But you got to think about it, right? Like we said, keeping Ohtani around from a financial standpoint, from a baseball standpoint, from a fan standpoint, it's essential. You have to do everything you can do to keep that guy around.
It's the amount of assets and resources that they're going to use this season. It's crazy because you do have to wonder how much Ohtani as representations pay attention to that stuff and pay attention to the future implications of it and what they can continue to do to build a contender around it.
Yeah.
It's great to make the playoffs this year, but how are you going to keep making the playoffs? Because this is not the NBA. This isn't 2 stars and you figure everything else out.
Yep.
And one thing that I was just looking up, as you mentioned, the money before, and them taking on salary, not something that would concern them. It's kind of interesting that they right now are $4 million under the competitive balance tax. They are right there at that threshold.
Mm.
And when you trade for Eduardo Escobar and the Mets eat all the money, and they gave up, I mean, to give up Coleman Crow for Eduardo Escobar,
Yeah.
that was a significant prospect for a player that was barely playing on the Mets. That was
Right.
all about the money that was eaten, getting a player that they could add for basically the minimum. I do wonder if they would like to stay under that, knowing that they're probably, if they keep Ohtani, might be paying him. I mean, definitely upwards of
A
50, maybe
million
close to
billion.
60. Do you want to avoid a repeater tax? And that's like this needle they're trying to thread. Like, how do you stay
Uh,
under the tax, build enough around? They are in, as a
yeah.
franchise, it feels like they're in a really bad spot, but hey, maybe it all works out and you go on a crazy run
Yeah.
this year.
It's not good long term. I mean, it's really not. And I thought they should have blown it up a year or two ago. I mean, or even this past year, I think they could have still. It's just you're not. It's hard. Like we said, baseball is different than most sports. You have 2 of the best players ever to touch a baseball field on your team, but it's really hard to build a roster around those guys. I mean, and you've got on top of that, you have 3 guys that are getting paid $40+ million a year when you include Anthony Rendon, who's barely even on the field, right? So you have 3 dudes that are just making that those 3 salaries are more than half the teams in the league payroll right now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to build a roster that way, and especially when a lot of their prospects haven't really panned out for them over the last few years. So it's like, what do you do if you don't have a lot of young talent? I mean, their farm system is not one of the better ones in the league. It's towards the bottom ranks of the league. If you don't have a lot of young talent, you don't have that much financial flexibility, and your roster is pretty average for the most part. I mean, it's a tough spot, but you have to keep just pedal to the metal and see what you can do when you have a guy like Shohei Ohtani, who is the face of your franchise, the face of baseball. I mean, it's just it's a tricky spot, but they got to keep on chugging along, and I think it's possible. I think it's possible. I mean, you get Shohei Ohtani and you get Mike Trout in the playoffs. I could see anything happening, but it's going to take a lot.
When you look at what this franchise is and where it's been, it's a team that consistently has given out bad contracts. And Josh Hamilton to Albert Pujols and now Rendon. I mean, you mentioned it there, $40 million player. He's getting 38 this year, and he has 3 more years after this at 38. I mean, that's going to be tough to navigate around, particularly if Ohtani gets, whatever it ends up being. I think when me and Jack were on the Just Baseball show the other day, he said
A lot.
57 million, and I don't even know if he was selling him short. It's crazy.
I mean,
So
yeah, it's going to be an insane contract.
it's absurd. So we'll see what the Angels do. The clear thing about all of this is they are going to pull out all stops to make the playoffs this year. It's just when you look
Yeah.
at those teams above them, and are they going to make it over the Astros? Are they going to make it over the Yankees, the Blue Jays, the Orioles? If I was an Angels fan, I'd be very nervous about how this year is going to shake
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. And it's are they better than those teams right now? No. Can they get better? Maybe. It's gonna take some work for sure. And I believe me, I'm rooting for it, honestly, as an objective sports fan and baseball fan. Like Shohei Ohtani and Mike Trout in the playoffs is something we all
Yeah.
deserve. I mean, seriously, that is like we saw the World Baseball Classic. We've seen the impact those guys can make just on the culture of baseball. We need to see those two in the playoffs. The world deserves it. It should happen, and it's just how is it going to happen? I mean, if they want any player from the White Sox, by all means, go ahead. Same thing with I think a lot of other teams are going to be. I mean, it's a tricky seller. It's a tricky market for buying right now. I think it's definitely a seller's market right now, and there's not many people selling. So it's going to be interesting. I think the next few weeks is going to play a huge role in how they go about this because there's going to be teams in the next between now and the end of July. How teams perform the next month is going to determine a lot of different teams' route for the rest of the season. So it's going to be interesting, and they gotta do all they can.
They do, and I think we'll end on this. To me, what gets the Angels in the playoffs is the same thing that they're trying to get to the playoffs for, and that's Shohei Ohtani and what he can do for them on both sides. And if he can, win a Cy Young this year, and obviously he's going to be the MVP, and do it on both sides and be the best hitter and best pitcher in baseball, there's every chance that they can make the playoffs and go on a crazy run. But then after it, even let's just say they make it to the playoffs because Ohtani's greatness and they lose in the wild card round. Is there going to be a moment where Ohtani's going to sit back, look around him, look at the franchise he's been playing for, the farm system, the money on the books, and everything else, and
Yeah.
he has smart people in his ear? Is he going to say, "I need to take my talents somewhere else to give myself a chance to really win
And
significantly"?
and there's other teams that are going to offer him just as much money. So it's like that's exactly right. But just how you just said it. I mean, he has to look around and say like, is this a franchise that can bring me success and bring me a championship? And I'm not sure it is. They've got to prove it to him in the next few months for sure.
We'll see if they can. That's going to be all for today's edition of Who's Better Baseball. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe on YouTube. Check out all the great written content we have coming your way at justbaseball.com.